For the past 15 years, as a Cormac McCarthy fan, I've noticed that the community has a general consensus surrounding McCarthy's novels. And today I'm going to be playing a game of overrated versus underrated in regards to how the community feels. And our first novel of the day is the baby of the community, our bastion, Blood Meridian. And Blood Meridian is 100% overrated, everybody. People still love cheap horror films. Scream, Halloween, whatever. The movie theaters still get packed for those films. And so, of course, the book with the most amount of violence, scalping, raping, whatever, has been elevated into the spotlight by that underclass of people that reside in the one and done McCarthyans. And I love Blood Meridian. It's beautiful. But the only person I would give Blood Meridian first to, if I was recommending McCarthy, would be one of those Black Ops zombie type guys who love horror films, who've, found this new spark of intellectualism after they read about existentialism on Reddit. But everyone else, that's down the list. And so let's talk about McCarthy's most recent publication, Stella Maris. I would say that Stella Maris is for sure properly rated. And if you guys want to comment, you can just list all the novels out. I'll put a template in the description. You can just put overrated, underrated, properly rated. And Stella Maris has a lot of shortcomings. Obviously, McCarthy is ranting. He's breaking one of the old golden rules of fiction writing. Don't put your politics and your beliefs too much into the novel. He somewhat struggles with Alicia's voice as a female, but I think that's less of a problem than people are making it. And it also seems somewhat incomplete in regards to how much we get from Alicia about things not related to the sciences. But it's still a very good novel that paints a very philosophical picture of McCarthy's current view of reality. And it has evolved immensely since he started hanging out at the Santa Fe Institute and with all these really smart thinkers. I've been doing a deep dive into his unpublished screenplay, Whales and Men, and a lot of his ideas have evolved since then. And so I think the criticism is warranted, but there's still a ton that you can get out of Stella Maris. Next, we have another baby of the community, and it is No Country for Old Men. And I would say this one is properly rated. A lot of people have noticed that the book has a lot of nuance that the movie doesn't. Obviously, the Coen brothers did a fantastic job, and they just didn't necessarily have the time or the angle to bring in some of the dream sequences and some of the more philosophical aspects of the novel. But once you read the novel, those are there, and those pile on top of this story that's just so endearing. This unforgivable character, Chigurh, the brooding and contemplative Belle. All of this works very well, and because it started out as a screenplay, the dialogue hits good, and what McCarthy seemingly added into the novel is all the dream stuff. So I can understand that the Coen brothers probably got the original screenplay, and a lot of that wasn't in there. Next, we have The Crossing, and I would say The Crossing is not underrated. I would say, not to put it all, I would say it's properly rated. That it, in my opinion, is as good, if not a better novel than Blood Meridian. And it technically hasn't gotten the hype that All the Pretty Horses and Blood Meridian, the Road, No Country for Old Men has gotten, but a lot of people still appreciate it. It's my number one most recommended McCarthy book, and it could err on the side of underrated, but most people who read it recognize it for what it is. It's respected in the community. Next, we have All the Pretty Horses, and this one's really interesting because it could be underrated in the sense that a lot of people, because of its popularity and kind of its simple nature, kind of talk down on it. I've somewhat done that before. I kind of said that I feel McCarthy pulled a lot of punches with this one because Blood Meridian was wild, The Crossing was pretty long and philosophical, and All the Pretty Horses seems like this big step back when he, changes companies and was probably told, yo, bro, you can make some big money if you lay off all that King James crap. But I could also see how it was overrated that 200,000 people bought it in 6 months in 1992 and ignored all the other McCarthy books up until that point. But I would say for what it's trying to do, that All the Pretty Horses is underrated. I see a lot of people not give this the appreciation it deserves, but in its minimalism, it has complexity. It is through and through a very good novel. Is it as good as a lot of his novels? No, it's probably more in the middle of my list. But I feel like a lot of people sleep on that novel just because it's the most romantic, you could say the most girly of all of his works. It's very romantic. Next, we have, of course, The Passenger. And I would say that this is underrated. A lot of people have come into the McCarthy circle. It has like 3.8 on Goodreads, and they don't like the at least the Hortz aspect of the novel and kind of the first slog that you have to go through. McCarthy ranting about JFK and all these performers coming out and performing one for one as for Alicia. But it's one of these novels that now that I've reread it a couple times is very much matured. And as I've learned about a lot of the aspects and science that McCarthy's talking about, it almost seems limitless in terms of like the interpretations and what you can pull from it. I think at the end of the novel, we get with all the scenes with Bobby kind of once he really goes back home to Tennessee, from there on, that is McCarthy functioning better than he's ever written before. We are getting a very similar style to like The Crossing and even to Suchri in certain scenes. It's like Suchri meets The Crossing, but there's an addition of science, of, mental illness, depravity. We are given a character where McCarthy goes deeper than any other character. What character goes deeper than Bobby Western in terms of what we've been given by McCarthy? Probably no one. We know his motives. We know what he's thinking. We are getting pretty clear backstory, especially if you can like pull together the timeline in your head. A lot of stories like Suchri, and basically all of McCarthy's novels, don't give us that great of a timeline of where the characters started and how they got to the present moment in the novel. So underrated for sure. Next, we have The Orchard Keeper, and this has to go on underrated. This is one of these novels that you have to read slow. You have to be diligent about it. It rewards rereading immensely. And this is the only novel that you could say McCarthy didn't get put into check with. He worked on this and he gave it everything that he had. And he was only 30 years old, but he was doing stuff that he would never return to because they told him, bro, this is too complicated. You are too good. You're going to have to dial it back. And we kind of see that in Outer Dark and Child of God before he kind of expands again with Blood Meridian and Suchri. But we get this young, attack-oriented McCarthy with his prose, just infernal prose. And it is McCarthy's most autobiographical novel. By far, the more research I've done into it, the more I've realized how close everything in that novel is to his heart. A lot of the locations are within a mile of his childhood home. A lot of there are similar names. People he named without changing names, a lot of the people from his personal life in the novel. And so if you can kind of understand those nuances more, there's so much to talk about. I've been finishing up my 10 hours on The Orchard Keeper for the course, and when I started the novel, I couldn't imagine talking about it for 10 hours, but now I'm like, 10 hours isn't enough. We might be pushing this to 15. Right, so next we have Suchri, and I would say Suchri is not underrated. Well, it could, honestly, it could go into underrated. A surprising amount of people don't finish Suchri and never read it. I know Cormac McCarthy fans, and that's the last novel they'll read because the start is a little bit hard. The prose and like getting into it, it's one of the harder launches in terms of McCarthy's novels. It's not short. Child of God and Outer Dark are pretty short and you can kind of slog through that. But in Suchri, you have to commit to this beautiful mosaic of random events that have this tethering within it that's Southern, that most of us don't understand. To most Americans, to Westerners, the American South is probably one of the more inaccessible cultures in America. There's, that level of bizarre nuance and charm and weird darkness that makes me avoid it when I plan my vacations most of the time. So next on our list, we have Child of God. And in my opinion, Child of God is for sure overrated by the community. First of all, I think the naming of it, Child of God, really taps into people's religious trauma or their religion. Everyone wants to see what McCarthy is going to say about God. And that's honestly not what this novel explores very much. And there's kind of a bleed over from the Blood Meridian fans to Child of God. First of all, I think the name's attractive, but it's also one of the more violent novels. We just have this necrophiliac kind of weird killer. There's not too much internal monologue of figuring out who Lester Ballard is. And so it is way overhyped. I think I'll just say it on the record here that it's McCarthy's worst novel. And one of the reasons it's the worst is because when McCarthy was writing Outer Dark, he needed more money. This was actually kind of one more of McCarthy's money novels, like trying to get something out. This story was kind of started as an offshoot of Cola's journey, in Outer Dark. And so he took kind of this side quest story and turned it into a novel, but he had a pretty fast turnover with it relatively compared to his other books. And at this time, he was more strapped for cash than any other time in his life. He was starting to live a new lifestyle with his second wife, Annie Delisle. She was somewhat bougie, and he needed more work to get more grants and whatnot. So next we have Outer Dark, and I would throw Outer Dark in properly rated. A lot of people, get really into Outer Dark as the dark horse of his Southern works. And it's, yes, very symbolic, and it is very good. But at some level, it is somewhat overhyped. I think it is beautiful in capturing kind of an eerie Southern feel that has a good dose of symbolism, but I don't view it as this novel with super deep philosophical implications. This is the novel that all the people that argue about McCarthy's theology and Gnosticism and this is their bastion. And so I love Outer Dark, but I think it's rated pretty well with where it's at. It's just a shorter novel for him, but it's probably the best out of the Orchard Keeper and Child of God for the early shorter Southern novels. Next, we have Cities of the Plain, and I would say Cities of the Plain is underrated. A lot of people didn't like this one because the first 75% of it was written as a screenplay. So when McCarthy returned to it as a novel, he had to fill in the blanks at the end. So the final 25% is actually really good, but I don't think it fails as a novel anyway. I think that John Grady Cole and Billy coming together is just magnificent, especially if you've read the first two books, even if it's maybe not as poppy or crazy as you want. A lot of people dismiss this novel, but once again, it's another novel that I have come to more so enjoy through my rereadings of it. I haven't reread it as much as I should. I've read All the Pretty Horses probably 7-8 times, and The Crossing maybe like 12 or 13, and Cities of the Plain maybe 4, maybe 5. And I just reread it like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, man, I've been sleeping on this book. There's a lot to talk about here, and obviously I'll be bringing some of that to the channel. Next, we have The Road, and I would say The Road is overrated for sure. I'm a huge fan of dystopian literature, and no one has ever written prose like McCarthy in a dystopian novel, but for the amount of hype it gets and people's attitude toward it, I think it's somewhat weak. Yes, it makes you contemplate the violent anarchy of society, but there are books that make you do that a lot better. So it does have the beautiful prose behind it, which I think makes it a great novel. It's a great dystopian novel, but people sometimes champion it as like McCarthy's best work or like some epic piece of speculative fiction. And great prose can't carry you in 2023 all the way anymore. So there you have it, everyone. Tell me what your ratings are down below. I'll post the template in the description, and I'll continue. If you guys like this, let me know. I'll continue to do this for McCarthy screenplays, some of the aspects of Cormac McCarthy's writing style. Peace.